A man, haggard and bewildered, lays upon a rail car floor, being pulled by a locomotive down the tracks. His goal: find whatever work possible for his struggling family that's far away back home. This man was my grandfather, and he made several trips on rail to find whatever work possible during the Great Depression. The Great Depression was a time in America's life where everything failed. Banks closed, companies laid off workers, and farmers abandoned land due to drought. This time was a very dark time, and would the country survive? The Great Depression was a dramatic time in America's history where everyone felt the economic pinch. Not only America felt it, but other countries faced it too. It would take a lot of time, action, and a great event to combat this serious and terrible time. Let's begin with the causes of the Great Depression. According to Martin Kelly, the stock market crash of October 29, 1929, was the start of the Great Depression. That is where 16 million shares of stock and $40 billion with 16 million shares of stock were sold, and $40 billion were lost. Bank failures. At this time, banks didn't have any money in their vaults. And so when people realized that the Great Depression was coming and they went to go withdraw money from their accounts, they couldn't. So banks inevitably closed and people lost their money. No money means no purchasing power, which means production decreases. And that also means increased layoffs. Increased taxes from the Smoot-Hawley tariff in 1930 led to the less trade, which meant all countries concerned suffered. Drought in the Midwest caused people there to move, and a huge shift in population occurred, and slang like Okies and Arkies. By 1932, 1 in 5 people, over 12 million Americans, were unemployed. People all over were affected. In cities, soup lines were formed that went around the block. People in the rural left behind their farms during drought. What people had, they sold or left behind. People were forced from their homes to move to shanty towns or Hoovervilles, as what they were called. Most don't know other countries were also going through their own depression. America was lucky. They won World War I, and they prospered. But other countries who lost the war had to rebuild their country with no money, so they faced their own economic woes. During Hoover's run, he didn't believe in helping people. However, he did issue a $2 billion in aid to keep farmers, banks, railroads, and the insurance company afloat. He started a public works project that became known as the Hoover Dam. However, these actions were weak. It would take one man to actually do something to get this country out of the Great Depression. His name was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. His first action as president was to start a 4-day bank holiday. That would give him time. That would give him and Congress time to come up with some ideas to get the banks back on track. They approved aid for the banks, and they also approved a thing called the FDIC, which, if a bank fails, that money is insured and you get every cent back. Then he started a production of a wheat beer, which ended prohibition. According to Ronald Edsworth, the CCC came soon after, which was known as the Civilian Conservation Corps. Their job was to hire young men to build or maintain roads, plant trees, clean up trash, and etc. They were paid $30 a month. 22 of those dollars went to their families. By 1942, there was nearly 3 million people enrolled into the program. The NRA and TVA came soon after that. The TVA was to help with the electrical infrastructure by building dams. The NRA, according to Dennis Nishi, started our normal work system, 8-hour days, minimum wage, and no child labor. FDR also established a GI Bill, Social Security, and fireside chats. These chats were to put trust back into the fellow citizens of the United States. Fireside chats also became known as State of the Union addresses. Roosevelt's New Deal was experimental. His idea was try something. If it doesn't work, try something else, but keep trying. Even if it didn't get the country out of the Great Depression, it sure did put America back on its feet. It would take something bigger to get us out of the Depression once and for all. In the 1940s, tensions rose in Europe, and this boiled over to become World War II. America had no intention of going into war until December 7, 1941, when Japanese planes bombed Pearl Harbor. This made FDR declare war on Japan. Wartime had to be treated with special attention. Rations for metal, rubber, and commodities like sugar had to be made in order to fight this war. When men were off fighting, women worked the jobs the men would work. They built planes, tanks, autos, and ammo that the men would use to fight the war. The image of Rosie the Riveter was the beginning of women in the workforce. This war had to end soon, and so in 1945, 2 nuclear bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and later in 1945, the war was declared over. When GIs came home, they were given compensation for their job thanks to the GI Bill. That money was used to start a family. They could buy a house, car, and things for the baby. This time from 1946 to 1964 was known as the baby boom. This made production increase and unemployment shrink. It also spiked population. This time, the country was finally out of the Great Depression, and it had become a superpower that it needed to be. So in conclusion, a lot of bad things had to happen to our country to pull us out of the Great Depression. People had to lose everything before any action was taken. When action was taken, it was forceful, and it helped the country. During World War II, great tragedy had to happen to finally get us fired up into going into war. Great progress and effort was made in fighting the war. After the war, the country faced an economic boom. That led it out of the Great Depression, and it became the superpower that it is today.